when millionaire Daniel Cross said, "I do" to Claire Hughes. A woman society had unfairly judged for her looks. It wasn't love that led him to the altar. It was a reckless dare. But what he didn't know was that the joke he played would turn his world upside down, revealing truths that no amount of money could shield him from. The day Claire discovered the cruel bet that sparked their marriage, she didn't slam the door or throw accusations. Instead, she walked away with tears in her eyes and a dignity that cut deeper than words ever could. And that was the moment Daniel realized he had lost far more than just the bet he thought he'd won. Daniel Cross was the kind of man everyone envied, young, wildly successful, and oozing confidence. To his circle of wealthy friends, life was just one big game, and Daniel loved being the player in charge. So, when they dared him to marry someone who didn't fit the mold of perfection for $1 million, he laughed and said, "Why not?" Claire Hughes was the last person Daniel expected to notice, let alone marry. A soft-spoken woman with a heart bigger than the world. She spent her days rescuing animals and finding joy in life's simplest moments. To Daniel, she seemed like the perfect pawn in his elaborate game. To Claire, Daniel seemed like a chance to finally find someone who saw her for who she truly was. But their union wasn't the fairy tale Claire had dreamed of. Behind Daniel's charming smile lay a secret too cruel to imagine. And when the truth came to light, it wasn't Daniel's millions, his status, or his smooth-talking ways that could fix what he'd broken. What happens when a man who's used to buying everything learns that love and forgiveness can't be bought? And how does a woman, betrayed by the person she trusted most, find the strength to rise above heartbreak? This is a story about pride, redemption, and the unshakable power of kindness. A journey that will leave you believing in the extraordinary resilience of the human heart. Daniel Cross always prided himself on being a man of his word, even if that word was tied to a reckless dare. It started as a harmless bet during a lavish poker night with his equally wealthy friends. They were sipping expensive whiskey, surrounded by opulence. When the challenge was laid on the table, marry someone society wouldn't expect, someone who doesn't fit the millionaire mold, and we'll each put $1 million into the pot. You win if you last a year. The room erupted in laughter, and Daniel, ever the confident gambler, smirked. To him, it wasn't just about the money, it was about proving he could win at any game, no matter the stakes. Little did he know, the stakes would soon go beyond anything he had ever imagined. Claire Hughes entered Daniel's life like an unassuming breeze on a sweltering day. He first saw her at a charity fundraiser, a modest event raising money for a struggling animal shelter. While Daniel's friends fawned over glamorous attendees, Claire stood apart in a simple floral dress, her hands gently cradling a tiny rescue puppy. Her laughter was soft but genuine, her kindness unmissable. She wasn't the type of woman who turned heads in the circles Daniel frequented. But that's exactly why she caught his attention. Claire was different, not the glamorous, high-maintenance figures he was used to, but warm, grounded, and real. She seemed perfect for the dare. After all, Daniel reasoned, what harm could there be in a little charade? With calculated charm, Daniel approached Claire. His smooth words and dazzling smile easily masked his true intentions. Claire, who was used to being overlooked by men like Daniel, was both surprised and flattered. Against her better judgment, she let herself believe in the possibility of love. Their whirlwind romance was a spectacle, fueled by Daniel's grand gestures, lavish dinners, surprise gifts, and impromptu vacations. Claire's friends warned her to be cautious, but her heart wanted to believe in the sincerity of Daniel's attention. For Daniel, however, the relationship was simply a means to an end. When their wedding day arrived, Claire's joy was palpable. She walked down the aisle with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by the thought that someone like Daniel could truly see and love her. Daniel, on the other hand, was focused on the prize. Yet, as he exchanged vows with Claire, a strange pang of guilt flickered in his chest. He quickly brushed it off. The ceremony was nothing short of magical, with soft music, twinkling lights, and heartfelt speeches. as the newlyweds shared their first dance. Claire whispered, "Thank you for choosing me." Daniel froze for a moment, the weight of her words pressing on his chest. But his pride and arrogance kept him from facing the truth of what he had done. Before we continue with this incredible story, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever believed in the transformative power of love, hit that like button because things are about to get intense. Their honeymoon marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where cracks in Daniel's facade began to show. Claire, with her unrelenting kindness and simplicity, slowly unraveled parts of Daniel he didn't know existed. She introduced him to joys he had never experienced, like the satisfaction of cooking a meal together or the quiet peace of volunteering at the animal shelter. But behind the smiles, Daniel felt the weight of his deception grow heavier. Every time Claire beamed at him with unfiltered happiness, the guilt gnawed at him. He found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't expected. She wasn't just a pawn in a bet anymore. She was a woman with a heart so genuine it left him questioning his own. The stakes of the dare no longer felt like a prize. They felt like a noose tightening around his neck. Yet, Daniel couldn't bring himself to confess. He thought he had more time, a way to fix things before the truth came out. But secrets have a way of surfacing at the most inconvenient moments. And when Claire stumbled upon a conversation Daniel had with his friends, one where the dare was discussed with cruel laughter, the world she thought she knew crumbled. Stay tuned, because what happens next will challenge everything Daniel believed about love, redemption, and the true cost of pride. Claire's discovery of Daniel's cruel dare hit her like a thunderclap. She stood frozen outside his study door, hearing his friends laugh and congratulate him for pulling off the ultimate gamble. Her heart, so full of hope, shattered into 1,000 silent pieces. Quietly, she turned and walked away, leaving the man she thought she loved basking in the hollow victory of his deceit. That night, Claire packed a small bag, careful not to wake Daniel. When he finally noticed her absence the next morning, the silence in their home was deafening. Her handwritten note lay on the kitchen counter. "I thought I knew you, Daniel, but now I see I was wrong. You didn't just break my heart, you broke my trust. Don't come looking for me." Daniel stared at the note, his chest tightening. For a man who thought he had everything, the hollowness of the mansion around him was unbearable. For the first time, his wealth felt like a cage rather than a gift. Yet, in his pride, he convinced himself Claire just needed time. He would win her back, just as he had won everything else in his life. But days turned into weeks, and Claire didn't return. The emptiness grew, and with it, a nagging feeling Daniel couldn't ignore. He had underestimated Claire. She wasn't just another piece in his game. She was the first person who made him question the man he had become, unable to focus on his work or enjoy his usual indulgences. Daniel began to remember the life Claire had shown him, the afternoons at her animal shelter, where she cared for the abandoned and unloved with tireless devotion, the quiet evenings they spent cooking together, laughing over her stories about the quirky animals she'd rescued. Each memory struck him like a sharp pang of regret. He began to realize how her simple joys had given his life a depth he hadn't known he craved. Driven by a desire to understand the world Claire came from, Daniel showed up unannounced at her shelter one afternoon. He expected icy indifference, maybe even anger, but the staff greeted him with kindness. They hadn't yet heard of Claire's departure. One of the younger volunteers, a bright-eyed teenager named Lily, eagerly took him on a tour. As Lily talked about the animals' stories of neglect and redemption, Daniel felt something shift. The shelter, with its peeling paint and crowded cages, wasn't just a place where animals were saved. It was a sanctuary for broken souls. In every rescued dog wagging its tail or purring cat curled in contentment, Daniel saw a reflection of himself, someone who had been given a second chance but didn't yet deserve it. When he asked about Claire, Lily hesitated. "She hasn't been here for a while," she said softly. "She said she needed time away to figure things out." But she'd want you to meet Lucky. He's our latest rescue. Lucky was a scrappy terrier mix with one ear flopped over and a patchy coat. He bounded up to Daniel, tail wagging furiously, and licked his hand without hesitation. In that moment, something inside Daniel softened. He decided to stay and help around the shelter, hoping to feel closer to Claire and to prove, if only to himself, that he could be the kind of man she believed he could be. The work wasn't easy. Daniel spent hours cleaning cages, feeding animals, and helping with adoptions. It was a far cry from the luxury and ease he was used to, but each task grounded him. The staff, initially skeptical of his intentions, began to warm to him as they saw his genuine effort. Daniel even took Lucky home, finding solace in the dog's unwavering loyalty and boundless energy. But Claire's absence was a constant ache. Daniel wrote letters he never sent, replayed their conversations in his mind, and wondered if she could ever forgive him. One evening, as he sat on the floor of his sprawling living room with Lucky curled beside him, he realized forgiveness wasn't something he could ask for. It was something he had to earn. With this new clarity, Daniel started making changes. He liquidated part of his fortune to fund the shelter, ensuring it had the resources to expand and continue its work. He began speaking at charity events, using his influence to advocate for kindness and second chances, not just for animals, but for people, too. These actions didn't erase his guilt, but they gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't known before. Meanwhile, Claire was rebuilding her life in a small coastal town miles away. She had rented a cozy cottage and started volunteering at a local wildlife rescue center. The salty air and rhythmic crash of the waves brought her peace. But the pain of Daniel's betrayal lingered. She missed him, despite everything, and hated herself for it. One rainy afternoon, while sorting supplies at the rescue center, Claire overheard a news segment on the radio. It was about a wealthy businessman who had turned his life around to support animal welfare. Her heart skipped when she heard Daniel's name. The broadcaster praised his humility and dedication, noting his hands-on involvement at a small shelter. For the first time since she'd left, Claire allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, Daniel had changed. That hope was tested a week later when Daniel showed up unannounced at her cottage. He stood on her porch, rain-soaked and visibly nervous, clutching Lucky's leash. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lucky barked, breaking the tension. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry for everything, for the bet, for lying, for taking you for granted. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I couldn't let you think for one more second that you weren't the best thing that ever happened to me." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. Daniel continued, desperation in his voice. "I know words aren't enough. That's why I've been trying to show it to the shelter, to myself, to anyone who'll listen. You taught me what love looks like, Claire. It's not perfect or easy, but it's real, and I don't want to live without it." Claire stepped forward, her hand trembling as she touched his cheek. "Daniel," she whispered, "I wanted to hate you. I really did. But seeing you now, I think maybe you finally understand what love means." Their embrace was tentative at first, then unrelenting, as though the months of separation had only made their connection stronger. Lucky barked again, wagging his tail as if to seal the moment. As they sat together, Claire realized that Daniel's apology wasn't just words. It was evident in his actions, his changed demeanor, and the love shining in his eyes. Forgiveness wouldn't come overnight, but for the first time, she believed they had a chance. And so, their journey together began anew, not as a game or a dare, but as two people determined to build something real, one act of kindness, one moment of honesty, one day at a time. Daniel knew that forgiveness, like trust, wasn't something he could ask for and immediately receive. It had to be earned, piece by piece, through actions that spoke louder than words. His reunion with Claire had rekindled hope, but it also underscored how far he still had to go to make things right. He wasn't just fighting to win her back. He was fighting to become a man worthy of the love she had once given so freely. Claire, though moved by Daniel's heartfelt apology, remained cautious. Her heart wanted to believe in his transformation, but her mind reminded her of the pain he'd caused. She agreed to stay in touch, but with clear boundaries. They began with small steps, brief phone calls, occasional updates about Lucky, and shared conversations about the shelter. Daniel poured himself into his efforts at the animal shelter, taking on more responsibility and immersing himself in the work that Claire had once cherished. The shelter, now thriving thanks to Daniel's funding and advocacy, had become a beacon of hope for both animals and people in the community. It was there that Daniel found his own redemption, not through grand gestures but in the quiet moments. Calming a frightened dog, finding a forever home for a once-abandoned cat, or simply sitting with an animal that needed comfort. One day, Claire visited the shelter unannounced. She had heard about its transformation and wanted to see it for herself. She arrived to find Daniel on his hands and knees, cleaning a muddy pen while a group of children surrounded him, laughing as a playful puppy tried to steal his rag. It was a far cry from the polished, self-assured man she had first met. This Daniel was humble, patient, and deeply invested in something greater than himself. As Claire watched from a distance, Lily, the young volunteer, approached her with a wide smile. "You're Claire, aren't you? Daniel talks about you all the time," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "He's really changed, you know. He's here every day, doing whatever needs to be done. The shelter wouldn't be what it is now without him." Claire felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to genuinely care. But as she walked through the shelter, seeing the animals thriving and the staff working with newfound energy, she realized that Daniel's actions spoke louder than any apology ever could. Later that evening, Claire and Daniel sat on a bench outside the shelter, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Lucky rested at their feet, his tail wagging contentedly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel broke the silence. "Claire, I know I've hurt you in ways I can never fully make up for," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But being here, doing this work, has shown me what really matters. I don't want to live the life I had before. I want to live a life that means something. A life that reflects the kindness and love you've always shown me." Claire looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any trace of the man he once was. What she saw was sincerity, a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. "It's not about proving yourself to me, Daniel," she said softly. "It's about proving to yourself that you're capable of change. And I think you're finally starting to do that." Their relationship began to rebuild. Slowly and cautiously, they spent more time together. But this time, it wasn't about grand gestures or fleeting moments of happiness. It was about genuine connection. Shared laughter over a stubborn puppy refusing to walk on a leash. Late-night talks about their fears and dreams. And quiet moments of companionship that didn't need words. Daniel also began to confront the deeper flaws that had driven his behavior. He sought therapy, something he had once scoffed at, and began unpacking the insecurities and pride that had led him to treat life as a game. It was a painful process, but each session brought him closer to understanding himself and the person he wanted to be. One day, Claire invited Daniel to her cottage. It was a simple gesture, but to Daniel, felt like a breakthrough. They spent the evening cooking together, just as they had in the early days of their relationship. As they laughed over a burned batch of cookies, Claire realized how much lighter her heart felt. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward. Their reconciliation reached its turning point during a community adoption event hosted by the shelter. Daniel had organized the event, bringing together families and animals in need of homes. As Claire watched him kneel down to help a little girl bond with a shy kitten, tears welled in her eyes. This was the man she had always hoped he could become. A man who used his privilege and power for good, who understood the value of compassion and humility. At the end of the day, as they stood together watching the families leave with their new pets, Daniel turned to Claire. "I know I don't deserve another chance," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But if you're willing to give me one, I promise to spend the rest of my life earning it." Claire reached for his hand, her fingers lacing through his. "Second chances aren't about deserving," she said. "They're about believing, and I'm starting to believe in you again." Their journey wasn't easy, but it was real. Together, they continued to build a life rooted in kindness, forgiveness, and a shared commitment to making the world a better place, one rescued animal, one heartfelt moment, and one act of love at a time. Months passed, and Daniel and Claire's relationship grew stronger, built on a foundation of trust, vulnerability, and shared purpose. The scars of their past remained, but they no longer defined their future. Instead, those scars became reminders of how far they had come and how much they had grown, not just as a couple but as individuals. One crisp autumn morning, Daniel surprised Claire with an idea he had been working on quietly for weeks. They stood in the middle of the bustling shelter, surrounded by wagging tails and cheerful volunteers. Daniel cleared his throat, nervous but determined. "I want to expand the shelter," he began, his voice carrying a mix of excitement and hope. "Not just this one, but shelters across the city, maybe even beyond. I want to create a network where no animal is left behind, where kindness and second chances aren't just ideas but realities." Claire's eyes widened as she listened. She had always dreamed of growing the shelter's reach, but resources and time had been barriers she couldn't overcome. Now, standing beside Daniel, she realized they had the power to make that dream come true together. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "Do you know how many lives this could change?" Daniel smiled, his hand reaching for hers. "I do, and I want to do this with you, for everything you've taught me about love, forgiveness, and the power of doing what's right." The project became a labor of love for both of them. Claire focused on the operational side, ensuring that the animals' needs remained the top priority, while Daniel used his connections and influence to secure funding and partnerships. The shelter became a symbol of hope in the community, drawing people from all walks of life who wanted to be part of something meaningful. One afternoon, as the shelter prepared to open a new wing, Claire received an unexpected gift from Daniel. It was a plaque, beautifully engraved, that read, "The Claire Hughes Second Chance Sanctuary, a place where every soul deserves love." Tears streamed down Claire's face as she read the words. She looked at Daniel, her heart swelling with gratitude. This is more than I could have ever imagined," she whispered. "You imagined it first," Daniel replied softly. "I just helped make it real." The grand opening of the new wing was a joyous occasion, filled with laughter, heartfelt speeches, and the delighted barks of dogs finding their forever homes. As the day wound down, Daniel pulled Claire aside, his expression suddenly serious. "There's one more thing I've been meaning to ask you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, velvet box and opened it to reveal a delicate ring. Its design simple yet timeless. "Claire, I don't want our story to be remembered for how it started. I want it to be about how we built something beautiful together. Will you marry me again, but this time, for all the right reasons?" Claire's breath caught in her throat. She looked into Daniel's eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and love. Her smile broke through the tears as she nodded. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with joy. 1,000 times yes. Their second wedding was a reflection of who they had become, intimate, heartfelt, and surrounded by the people and animals who had shaped their journey. Claire walked down the aisle with Lucky trotting beside her, wearing a little bow tie. The ceremony was held in the shelter's garden, a space they had transformed into a haven of greenery and warmth. As they exchanged vows, there wasn't a dry eye in sight. "I promise to love you, not for who you were or who I thought you should be, but for the man you are today," Claire said, her voice steady and strong. And I promise to keep growing with you, to face life's challenges together, and to never forget the lessons we've learned. Daniel's vows mirrored hers in sincerity. I promise to honor the love you've given me by being the best man I can be. I promise to support your dreams, cherish your heart, and make every day a reflection of the second chance you gave me. Their kiss sealed not just their commitment but the journey that had brought them to this moment. A journey marked by mistakes, redemption, and an unshakable belief in the power of love. As the evening sun bathed the garden in golden light, Claire and Daniel stood hand in hand, watching their guests, volunteers, adopters, friends, and family celebrate with laughter and joy. Lucky barked happily at their feet, a living reminder of the second chances that had changed all their lives. Do you think we'll ever top this day? Claire asked, leaning into Daniel's side. Daniel chuckled, wrapping an arm around her. I don't know, he said, but with you, I'm ready to try. Their story didn't end that day. It was only the beginning of a life dedicated to love, kindness, and creating a world where every soul, human or animal, could find its second chance. Together, they proved that no matter how broken a beginning might be, with courage and compassion, it's always possible to rewrite the ending.